Call me Fallout Boy, because today I'm a vault tech. These dice are looking so good, they pole vaulted over my expectations. And if I put gemstone dice or frozen dice inside here, I'd have an ice vault. That's a 2-for-1 pun. Better keep that one under lock and key. But don't Fort Knox it until you try it. These dice boxes are looking so good, these are truly some nice vaults. In a previous video, I took a look at Sophie and Toffee's pre-made mini dice molds, and in that video I asked if you all would want to see some of the other molds that I got from them, like this dice vault and box mold, and their redone regular dice molds. You all resoundingly said yes, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at both of those today. Since I have both of them, I thought it would be better to take both sets of molds and split them into two videos, so today we're just going to be looking at the dice vault or dice box mold that they sell. This video is going to be very similar to the last one, where it is half review of the product as it's received and half, okay, let's see what we can actually make with this product, because I want to be fair in its testing to say whether I like them or not. I've made dice boxes using pre-made molds before, so I have a pretty good comparison when I'm looking at these, and they are made in two separate parts, like pretty much most all of the dice box molds are. You have a lid, which is this piece right here, and a bottom half of the mold. The bottom half of the mold has a place for each die and a 7-dice set of RPG dice. It's trying to mimic that appearance and style of a lot of those high-quality wooden dice vaults out there. No complaints from me, that's really cool, and I'd love to make one out of resin, so we're going to do that. The top half of the mold's top, where you pour the resin, is actually the top of the overall vault, and the top of the bottom one is going to be the very bottom. That's kind of confusing, so I'll just have to show you as I go along. We're going to be using Envirotex light resin. There's no reason you have to use this resin over another. You can use whichever one's your favorite, but I would probably use a casting resin because this is still pretty small amounts of resin to be used. You can use UV resin on this, and we're going to test that later, but we're going to start with this AB epoxy style resin. The first mold that we're going to make with this stuff, I'm going to use some liquid glitter, which just makes everything a little bit shinier. You absolutely don't need this stuff, but it's kind of my secret weapon for making things look really cool. We're also going to add this mica flakes stuff, which looks amazing in anything, and now that we have a large mold, I wanted to try some of it, and we're going to be using some black pigment powder from Stuart Simple. This is some of the darkest pigment that used to be available for sale, and I'm trying to create this like black and green eldritch energy vibe, but I do mess up here because one thing that I should be aware of by now is that if you put a popsicle stick down in something, make sure it goes all the way down. Otherwise, you are going to get a ton of pigment all over everywhere. And pigment this fine is... oh man, when it gets in there, it stays in there. And so now that I have tried to wipe this pigment up, it is down in the tiny little cracks and crevices, and my mat will never be the same again. Pretending we all didn't see that, for the other half of the resin, I'm going to go ahead and mix up some green. I put a lot of Kelly green in there, and then I do a secret to make it a little bit darker. This black alcohol ink that I have has a lot of green pigment in it. So if you put a really tiny drop and mix it in with green, you get a really, really nice looking dark green out of it, which is what I was going for here. I was really wanting a dark, almost camo-y eldritch look, and when I put these mica flakes in there, I thought I could get a really cool energy looking vibe. After I got all that mixed, I could go ahead and pour it into the molds. Now remember, because the top of this bottom half mold here is actually going to be the very bottom or base of the vault when it's done, you want to put like a transparent like color towards the actual bottom of the mold and then fill it with the opaque color on top. That way you can actually see the dice in between each little channel. And as this sits here, it has a lot of bubbles whenever you mix anything with mica flakes like that. So I go over it with a lighter just to get rid of any surface bubbles before I pour the top on. You can see here I didn't put nearly enough pigment in. This black is kind of thin and runny. I wonder why. It's almost like some of the pigment fell out whenever I was originally trying to fill this thing up with black pigment. But either way, after I poured this in, I actually take a small toothpick and kind of swirl it just a little bit. I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I had left it almost clear between the black and the green layers, because it kind of gets muddled and you can't really tell a difference between the two colors. Oh well, I still think it looks good in the end. I do the same thing on the upper half of the vault mold, pouring some black kind of swirls in the top, which you can really start to see how thin that black paint is there and how transparent it's going to be, which again, I didn't really want. So I should make sure that I use enough pigment next time. One thing with these molds and pretty much all dice vault or dice box type molds is they are really flimsy and have very, very thin walls. Because of that, you can see here when I try and put this thing in, it kind of bends really easily. And so being that that's the case, I always put wax paper down because they have a tendency to accidentally push up against something, and a lot of the resin goes pouring out over the sides. I put these in the pressure pot for 24 hours at 40 psi, and that's double the actual cure time of this resin. I think that's a good idea because often whenever you take them right out right at the cure time, resin can still be a little flimsy, and we're going to have to pull hard on this resin to get them out of the molds. You can see there are a few bubbles here on the very top of the top mold, but that's okay. Those were really pretty much surface bubbles and might have happened anyway. I'm still pretty happy with how this turns out. Pulling the lid half out of the mold, you can see I had to be a little bit rough with it, but bada bing, bada boom, we have the top half of the dice vault, which also kind of functions as its own little dice tray. This bottom half here actually had a problem with all of the mica flakes. Some of them stood up a little bit, and there's nothing that a pressure pot can do to reduce that because a pressure pot is just reducing bubbles, so that's a problem. Pulling the silicone off of the resin for the bottom chamber is a lot harder because there's 7 individual chambers that silicone goes up into and gets stuck in because there's no air vent for it to kind of pull out of. It's transparent on the bottom, which is pretty cool. You can see me waving through it there, and they line up really nice. They just kind of lock themselves into place there. I'll talk about the holes you saw in them in a minute, but I do have to say, one thing you got to worry about is if you have oversized dice, like the dice that I make are a little bit larger than normal, they don't fit down into a mold of this style. That's the only disadvantage of these, is you have to have a specific size set of dice for them to work. Not a big deal. They use the typical sizing. I'm the one who uses too big of a dice, so I'm going to show them off using this RPG set of Moonstone Dreamwalker dice from Die Hard Dice. They're a really awesome set by a really awesome company. Hashtag not sponsored, but hashtag wish to be sponsored, and I think they look great, and they really complement the colors of this dice vault. But I wanted to make sure that this wasn't just beginner's luck, so I said, let's go ahead and make a second dice vault using this AB resin style and make sure that it still works for that. I mix up a large quantity of resin, which I'll talk about in just a minute, and in that resin I'm going to do the same thing that I did before, split it in half and add some liquid glitter to one half only this time, because on this half I'm going to leave it transparent, and the other half I'm going to add some gold. On the transparent half I'm going to add some of this leafing foil that's colored this kind of fuchsia pink color. I thought that would look really good with the gold, and by the way, I'm totally right. And in the other half of the resin I'm going to add some King Tut gold mica powder from Mad Micas. It's an ethically sourced mica powder because a lot of the other mica powders out there use child labor, and child labor's bad, so if we can avoid that, we're going to try. And the reason I made so much extra resin is because I wanted this dice vault to have a matching set of dice, so you can expect to see a set of dice whenever I do the review of the other specific dice molds that actually make dice. However, don't be too excited about that one. Spoiler alert, I guess, but that one's not going well as of the current moment. But either way, that is an extremely satisfying pour of that gold with that fuchsia kind of foil color, and I only do a little bit of mixing this time with the toothpick because I don't want it to blend like it did last time, and I'm already really loving this color combo. And on the top of the mold this time, I actually did the transparent in the opposite pattern. This way, whenever it's completed, you can actually see from the top of the vault down into the vault and see the dice on the inside and kind of get a sneak preview. You couldn't do that on the last one without it being very opaque, and I wanted this one to be a little bit different. However, I over poured on this one. You can see a lot of the resin comes out over the edges after it's cured, and that's a bad deal. It's not that horrible. If you were to take these out of the molds, you could definitely cut that away with an X-Acto knife or some clippers really easily, and then maybe even just go over with some extra resin to make it so it's not so noticeable. Either way, the finished product is one absolutely gorgeous looking dice vault. That color combo between the gold and the fuchsia is just it's so good. The underside is fantastic. You can't see through it, but you can see through the sides where there's that transparency, and it kind of locks into place there. It doesn't like snap shut like a vault with a hinge, but that's what these little holes for the magnets are for, and I'll show you that in a minute. For this set of molds, I'm going to put some gemstone Viking dice in there by Rainbow Shop CN on Etsy. I helped them design their Celtic dice and some of these Viking dice as well, and I just think they look really awesome. I don't have any financial compensation for that or anything. I just think they look awesome. Hashtag not sponsored once again. I just want to be able to tell y'all where I got these awesome dice in case y'all are ever wondering. And oh my god, your boy scored a nat 20 while reviewing stuff yet again. This is an awesome dice vault, and it's an awesome dice tray, and I'm an awesome person. I ran my X-Acto knife along the flashing or overspill of the resin just to get a flush edge along the vault there. You probably don't need to do that if you just don't overfill it. I did, and I thought that was a good enough fix to it to where I didn't want to have to re-pour these things. Now, let's go ahead and put some magnets into these little holes because that's a feature of this mold, and I want to make sure that it works works properly. I have some army painter magnets that are designed for miniatures, and they seem to fit perfectly down inside there, so I think just a dab of super glue will be all that I need to actually get the magnets down into the little holes. And after I put the magnets in, I take a little toothpick just to make sure that they sit nice and flat, and do a little bit of testing to make sure that the top half of the vault isn't going to have magnets that are repelling it, because that would be a bad deal. So after that super glue dries, I make sure I have it aiming on the right side before I put the next ones in. A single drop of super glue should have more than enough strength to hold the magnets down inside of there, especially how small the magnets have to be to actually fit in that hole. The super glue should be just fine. After it dries, you can go ahead and try aligning them and see if they work. And in my experience, the army painter magnets, which were the only magnets I had small enough to fit down in there, just aren't strong enough to really do anything. They keep the direction of the lid in place, and it makes sure that the lid isn't going to fall off accidentally. But you can see here, if I barely kind of just push down on it, the lid actually falls off on its own. If you actually put dice in there, that's even more of a problem. If I hold it upside down and I barely move it, the dice fall out, and I can't even pick it up at all from the bottom half that holds the dice down in there. That's more of a problem with the magnet, so I wouldn't worry too much. Now we're going to do some brief testing with UV resin, and I say brief because it doesn't exactly go very well, but I don't think it's a problem with the mold. I think it's more a problem with the resin, but I'm more interested to hear what you all think in the comments, because I'm not a typical UV resin user, but I've used Sophie and Toffee molds before with UV resin and had no problems. So I filled this thing up with resin that I've used in Sophie and Toffee molds before, and I go ahead and put it in my UV curing table that I made in a video before. This has never really had a problem with this type of resin, and so I figured it really wouldn't be an issue. I set the resin molds on top of the little turntable, which has enough strength to move it, so that's not the problem. However, it was a problem getting it down inside there. I get a lot of resin on my hands, so that's no bueno. And after I let that thing cure both on the top and bottom half of the molds, I really was not getting any solidified curing. You can see here as I push down on the molds, you can see some of the bubbles moving, meaning that the resin is not cured. And that was after like 30 minutes in there, and it should only take 3. So that was a problem. I took them out and left them out in the sun for 2 days, and they still had these kind of bubbly cracking texture, and I don't know what happened at all. They are perfectly cured. I can touch them. They're totally fine, and it's kind of cool. It looks like a really crappy ashtray, honestly, and it has a cool texture to it, but I wouldn't use it because it's deformed, and I don't know, it's just not great, but it still held its shape, and I don't think that it's going to be a problem with your UV resin. I just couldn't test it again because it takes so much UV resin to fill up this mold. All in all, this is the first Sophie and Toffee product that I would actually recommend. I think this is a really nice mold, and it makes for a really cool dice vault. As long as you use regular sized dice, you shouldn't have any problems. And because in resin molds like this, the top and bottom half are removable, so you can actually mix and match them. It's almost like Beyblade or collectibles where you're deck building, right? Like, oh, I've got this really unique top lid and a bottom lid that I can have for this character who uses gold and black. And with all this extra resin, I poured it into my dice tray mold that I've made, and I got an awesome looking dice tray with this black color on the bottom, gold in the center, and the kind of fuchsia leafing foil on the top. It just made this really cool color that I wasn't expecting, and now I want to make a whole dice set based off of these 3 colors, or a whole character based off of them, because I think it is an awesome combo. That's a digression. These are nice looking dice vaults from this mold, and I would recommend them as long as you use the standard size dice. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to everybody who suggested in the comments that I review this mold, because it was really cool, and I'm glad that I have multiple of these molds to use in the future, and I'll probably give some away sometime. Subscribe if you might want to see some more videos like this in the future. Like the video if you like it, and dislike it if you disliked it. Thanks again for watching, and I hope that you all have a fantastic day.